You're listening to the Doc Lounge podcast. This is a place for candid conversations with healthcare industry's top physicians, executives, and thought leaders. This podcast is made possible by Pacific Companies, your trusted advisor in physician recruitment. I am your host, Summer Gilbert, and I am the Director of Marketing and Branding here at Pacific Companies. And my lucky co-host today is Pacific Companies EVP of Training, the one and only Chris Call. Today on the podcast, we're talking to Katie Thompson, physician assistant out of Seattle, Washington. Katie is really unique. Her specialty is forensic medicine, and it's one that we don't hear about very often. She's also so inspired by this specialty that she started and runs a small LLC specializing in education and empowerment around interpersonal violence. So we're really excited to have Katie here today and to learn more about what forensic medicine is all about. And just a quick reminder, this podcast is intended to be an open forum. Any personal beliefs, views, or opinions represented in this episode are that of our guest and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Pacific Companies. So please have an open mind and remember that this podcast is not a news source, but rather a safe and neutral platform for candid conversations. Thank you for being here with us, Katie.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure.
To start this out, for the listeners who may not know what forensic medicine is, how would you describe it?
So the way I usually describe forensic medicine is it's kind of the intersection between medicine and investigation of a crime. So or the collection of evidence in relation to a crime. So myself specifically, I work with living victims of sexual assault, domestic violence, child abuse, both sexual and non-sexual child abuse, and human trafficking, along with a few other assorted crimes. And I gather DNA, photographic, and interview-based evidence of crimes committed against them. And then I also evaluate and treat injuries and prophylactically treat patients for exposures like to sexually transmitted infections, pregnancy risk, HIV, etc. Wow.
Can you tell us more? Have you seen an increase in the human trafficking? We see all these people migrating from country to country these days. Has that been an uptick in the past couple of years?
Oh, definitely. And I think we're also, one of the sort of catch-22s of crime overall is as we become more aware of a crime, we see a natural increase in that crime because we are looking for it with greater frequency. So I do think that, that accounts for part of it. But I would say for sure, depending on, where you live in the country or the world, we're definitely seeing more of it. I know that where I used to live in Los Angeles, that's one of the major hubs for human trafficking. Wow. And Seattle is not far behind, honestly, because anything that's basically on a port or has a lot of kind of in and out traffic, whereas near a border is going to be at a higher risk for human trafficking populations.
Wow. That's super heavy. With all that being said, what made you want to get into forensic medicine?
So, well, it's everything in my life. Basically, my trip into forensic medicine was a bit circuitous, but kind of totally makes sense at the end. For my whole life, basically, I've been really interested in the world of interpersonal violence. And, before I became a PA, I taught a women's self-defense class for almost 20 years, and I was just really interested in that stuff. And I was also a rape crisis advocate, so I was a volunteer to provide sort of emotional and logistical support to survivors of sexual assault. And then when I became a PA, so shortly after I became a PA, a newly minted PA, I decided to run a marathon to support my old organization that I was working for as a rape crisis advocate. Mm-hmm. And I ran into my old supervisor there at a meeting for the marathon runners. And she goes, oh, well, I just put a job posting up yesterday for a PA or an NP to be a forensic examiner. And I was like, oh, take it down. You can hire me. I want that job.
Wow, what fate. And the fact that you've been interested in this for so long and then given this opportunity, it was almost like it was meant to be.
I sometimes think it was. I think that I've always been sort of just drawn in this direction, and even in medicine, I was always sort of compelled to do research in those areas. And so I don't know, maybe it's a higher calling of some kind.
For sure. I believe it. What do you like least and most about forensic medicine?
Well, so I double specialize. I specialize in emergency medicine and also forensic medicine. And so I think least is probably where that intersection is and where I see like areas of improvement in emergency medicine to better serve victims on the forensic medicine side, and kind of navigating that world a little bit can be frustrating. But honestly, it can be really difficult subject matter. But I love everything about my job. And I would say what I like most is that, you are really wading into somebody's worst moment, and you are genuinely providing like a concrete step towards recovery. And I think that that's my favorite part, is seeing people like leave after they've spent, a couple hours with me, and being like obviously just a little bit lighter in soul or in body, by having completed that part of the investigation.
Yeah, that's powerful.
What would you say a typical day, typical week might be? There, maybe it's not typical, but kind of walk us through.
Sure. So, my dream, my goal one day is to do forensic medicine full time. But as it stands, I split my time between emergency medicine and forensic medicine. So my forensic medicine position is an on-call one. And so I sign up for a particular number of hours of call, and I work my ER shifts kind of around that. But call is anywhere from a total no-hitter where you don't get any calls, or you leave. We usually work on weekends, usually like a 24-hour shift, and on weeknights like a night shift. And some nights the pager goes off at the moment you go on call, and you stay there all night. And some nights it's like you sleep like a baby. So it really very much depends. But we usually get our patients from law enforcement. So they will call in and say, hey, we're going to be headed your way with a victim. This is our ETA. And then it's my job to kind of get there and set everything up and make sure that like all of our equipment is good to go. And then, I start with the whole investigation. And each case usually takes about 2 to 3 hours, depending on the complexity of the case.
Yeah. Are you do you work at different ERs in the area for forensic, or is it out of one?
So that depends on the area. I just recently moved to Seattle, so I'm still kind of establishing my stuff up here. Where I worked in LA, we did a combination. So we had a freestanding like exam center. And then we would occasionally, depending on what kind of case we were looking at, we would occasionally respond, do a mobile response to like local ERs if it was deemed necessary.
Is there a certain time of the day or week or evening that you find you get more calls?
That's a good question. I think if you talk to anybody who's ever spent any time in emergency medicine, they'll tell you it's always the full moon. And I think those sort of those superstitions sort of stand for forensic medicine too. It seems like we are busier when the moon is full, and it seems like we are busier on weekends. Or towards the end of the weekend. So like Sunday morning is often kind of astonishingly a busy time, and then Sunday night is usually pretty busy as well.
Yeah. It seems like obviously dealing with a lot of these victims, and then even your time working in emergency medicine, I'm sure you take a lot of stuff home. How is that? How have you learned to deal with that?
That's a really good question, and I think it's really important too, a very important one, and a skill that I had to learn, pretty early on, because of my, double specialties. So I work very hard at not bringing stuff home, and I have a very strong support network for when it's not possible to not bring it home. So I do a lot of kind of like mindfulness. And work really hard on like work-life balance. So, even if I, want extra money or feel like I could pick up an extra shift or two, I often don't, because it's really important to maintain that time to kind of like recover and bounce back. And then I have like a lot of things that I do during that time that kind of help me reground and recenter myself. So I do a lot of physical activity that helps keep me kind of calm and focused. And then I also have a therapist that I see sometimes when a case hits me sideways and it's really difficult for me to manage. And she is able to kind of like talk me through some of that in a secure and confidential environment. And I think that's really important for listeners to know too.
For sure. Finding a healthy way to deal with your stress is one of the most important things.
Walk us through, in the forensic area of your specialty, kind of the team that you work with for, our listeners that might be considering get into forensics, what they might, see as far as support network.
Sure. So we work very closely with the law enforcement side, as you can imagine. The people that I deal with most commonly are patrol officers, first of all, and those are the initial investigating officers on an incident. And then I also I have usually very close relationships with the detectives in the area. So there's usually at least one or two detectives, sometimes hundreds of detectives assigned to a sex crimes unit or, an interpersonal crimes unit of some kind. They're the ones that end up investigating kind of all these cases. So these get shuffled across their desks.
Mm-hmm.
So I frequently, interact with them, for additional information, or if we need a follow-up interview or something, that's often where I'll intersect with them. And then I also deal with the legal side of things. So I often testify in court. And when I testify, it's usually maybe 50% of the time as an expert witness. So I deal with district attorneys a lot, and assistant district attorneys, lawyers, other people that are kind of forming the sort of legal arm of, what's happening. And then from the medicine side, we have a supervising physician.
Would that be a psychiatrist?
No, it's usually an MD.
Okay.
And it's usually, they usually have some sort of personal interest in interpersonal violence,
Mm-hmm.
or a specialty, and they're often kind of they're usually boarded in family practice or emergency medicine. That's what I see the most commonly. But they review all of our case files, and just make sure that they kind of agree with our investigation and stuff. And they're the ones that that allow us under protocols basically to dispense medications and stuff. Because my coworkers, I'm actually often the only PA that works on the team. It's most often NPs and RNs.
Mm-hmm.
So my coworkers are working more under protocols than I am because they don't necessarily have a prescriber's license to give medication.
As far as forensic medicine goes, what's the most common case that you see?
I would say it's pretty evenly split into thirds between human trafficking, adult sexual assault, and child sexual abuse. And there's a lot of kind of sub categories under that as far as what I see most commonly in each one of those kind of major categories, but I'd say it's pretty evenly split. And it also very much depends on the area you're working in and what's being reported.
It's almost like you are a PA/psychologist in those moments.
Yeah. I mean, we also, that's another person that's often on our team is some sort of therapist or advocate. So they have either some basic or more advanced psychological training. So they frequently provide a lot of the emotional support, but you definitely end up also being kind of a prime, recipient of a lot of that from the victims.
Mm-hmm.
Given your interest in medicine, Katie, did you ever think about becoming a physician?
So I mean, I certainly considered it. Like everything else in my life, though, medicine was kind of a long journey to get here. So I actually started out. I have a master's degree in theater, and ironically, I kind of specialized in like special effects makeup. So I was actually recreating like injuries and trauma injuries and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of funny that I ended up here. But,
Yeah.
by the time that I got to the point where I was interested in medicine, what I knew I wanted more than anything was kind of like flexibility and the ability to kind of do multiple things at once. And so I chose PA specifically, and I am very happy with my decision because it does give me such a great amount of flexibility to do different things and try lots of different areas of medicine.
If you didn't do forensic medicine, what do you think you would have gone into?
I think probably like trauma surgery or general surgery or emergency medicine. I actually looked into working in forensic medicine when I was in PA school, and I couldn't find any real clear information on it. And so I kind of gave up a little bit, and I was like, oh, I don't know if this is really going to happen. And then I, fortuitously ran into my old boss, and she made it happen. So, I think probably without that, I would have ended up just pestering a bunch of emergency rooms into letting me do something that resembled forensic medicine.
Yeah.
Given that you're on the front lines, Katie, in the past couple of years, how have you seen maybe the practice of medicine change since you're also in the ER? You have a lot of depth of experience that maybe you can give some insight to the listeners.
Yeah, I mean, medicine is an ever-changing field, and it's one of the most dynamic and interesting parts about being in medicine is that every day is something a little bit different, and the field changes quickly. So, I mean, from my perspective, I think that I see a lot of fluctuations in emergency medicine and even in forensic medicine, depending on what kind of law or what kind of laws are being passed around like healthcare. So, when I started my career, it was before like Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act or, any of that. So like we had a huge population in the emergency room for primary care type stuff or for things that were, undermanaged or inadequately managed because they didn't have enough like primary care coverage. So chronic conditions, things like diabetes and hypertension, emergencies, and then we did see definitely like a fluctuation in that when the Affordable Care Act was passed. I don't have any like numbers to really back it up from, this is a colloquial perspective, but I feel like I definitely saw a drop off in the number of emergencies. So people were like better managed on the primary care side. So they weren't having as many like, diabetic ketoacidosis like episodes or hypertensive urgencies or stuff like that because they were, able to access their medications and stuff. Yeah. So, I definitely think like on the front lines we are, impacted by the kind of legislation that's passed.
Given that I know you've just moved to Washington, but do you see any different approach, medical and legal, between the states of Washington and California to forensic medicine?
Yeah, so in forensic medicine, we are definitely affected by the kind of legislation that is in effect, state and local, statewide and locally. The funding for forensic medicine programs is spotty at best, and so. You may have been hearing recently about like the Violence Against Women Act being like renewed, and that was a bit of a struggle this year, which is always really discouraging to see because it's such a valuable piece of legislation. But that also definitely earmarks a huge amount of funding for organizations that either assist victims or that provide like kind of the forensic medicine aspect. So, and then each state also is allowed to sort of earmark Violence Against Women Act funds or other funds that they are receiving or grants they're receiving for specifically like forensic medicine type pursuits. So it definitely is different depending on where you are, as far as like what the laws are.
So one of my favorite questions to ask is, what is your most interesting case so far? But I was just about to ask that, and it hit me. This is different with your specialty, with forensic medicine, because not only is this really sensitive stuff, but it's asking you to relive a situation. How do you feel about this question?
Well, so I think I could definitely answer it in a general sense. Obviously, like you said, and I appreciate your sensitivity. We're very strictly bound by a lot of privacy laws, and also by legal statutes that prevent us from kind of sharing specific information, especially while there's an active investigation. But I would say that in general, I see a lot of different levels of cases, and I think some of the most one of the most interesting cases I think I ever was involved with, and this one is closed, or I can speak in terms of non-specifics, but we actually had a case where to explain a little bit further, the field of DNA medicine is changing rapidly, and it's getting much more sensitive. And so previously, we could barely get a sample out of a direct saliva sample.
Yeah.
And now it's so sensitive and so good that we can pick up touch DNA off of things. So just by slapping someone on the cheek, or by grabbing someone on the arm, or even a steering wheel or an item of clothing, grabbing it, you leave skin cells behind. And we're now able to pick up samples of DNA from things like that. So we actually have had several cases that have been attempted kidnappings, for example, where a child was almost grabbed from the yard or the school or something like that, and we were able to swab where they were grabbed, or where the perpetrator touched them. Mm-hmm. And a few times we've been able to match DNA off of that and arrest a person.
Wow, the level of science these days just blows me away. And I really hope that these advancements in these forensic technologies deters people from, making those mistakes in the first place, and, keeping some people safe. So really incredible story. Thank you for sharing.
Katie, is there a personality type that you think is best suited to consider forensics as a potential career option?
What a good question. I think that the people who kind of flourish in forensic medicine are very similar to the ones who flourish in emergency medicine. And the skills that I think, or the personality traits that I think best kind of cross over are, sort of a boundless well of empathy or compassion, and then also a certain flexibility of personality in many different ways. So meaning you're used to working in austere or adverse conditions. You're accustomed to working through exhaustion and working in the middle of the night, or working off shifts or other things like that. And also being able to kind of adjust your response to people depending on kind of what type of person is sitting in front of you. So I find that skill really valuable in emergency medicine. Not everyone is going to enjoy a lot of jokes or a kind of light environment in a room. In the emergency room, not everyone's going to respond well to that. And so if you are able to sort of adjust and sort of flow with what the patient is wanting or feels comfortable with, then I think that really translates well into forensic medicine. And those are the skills that I find that I, use the most often, and that, I see in my coworkers as well.
And then same question for someone considering the ER.
Yeah, so I think there is a lot of crossover, but people who end up in emergency medicine are the kind of the hard drivers of medicine. We're the ones that are the workhorses, the hard workers. Not to say that other specialties aren't hard workers, but we work the off shifts. We work, a variety of different things. We have a certain flexibility, both of personality and also of time. So you don't really go into emergency medicine expecting a 9-to-5 schedule, Monday through Friday. You go into emergency medicine expecting to work, weekends and holidays and every moment in between. Mm-hmm. So I think that is, that's one thing that I look for in people that I work with in the ER, and also just a certain cheerfulness of spirit. You just roll your sleeves up, dig in.
Yeah.
If there's, 100 people in the waiting room, when there's 100 people in the waiting room, we're just going to bounce through them in whatever way we can. But, we just all need to kind of like roll up our sleeves and pitch in.
Right. Now, Katie, I noticed there's a couple articles that you have online. What inspired you to start an LLC? And can you explain that to our listeners why you did that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm super passionate about my business. So I run an LLC called IPV Educators, so like interpersonal violence educators. And I started it actually a little over a year ago, because from the beginning, from my time in forensic medicine, the very first time that I ever like presented or spoke about forensic medicine was during PA school. And it was because I realized as I was going through the PA school curriculum that there was really like very little coverage of any topic related to interpersonal violence. There was like one lecture on sexual assault, and it was like, just not great coverage as far as like what people really want to know about, like how to interact with survivors of sexual assault or interpersonal violence. And the more I thought about that, and the more I like talked to other people, I realized that there's like this gap where largely healthcare programs are allowed to sort of like make their own decisions about this type of curriculum. And for many, PA school is packed. There's a lot of very important topics in medicine. Same with med school, a lot of very important topics to cover. And I think there's sort of this feeling or this sense that like, well, we have to cover like hypertension, we have to cover heart disease, we have to cover diabetes. And what are the chances someone's going to see, a survivor of interpersonal violence, depending on like which environment they go into. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's a tendency to kind of downgrade the importance of the material, and not out of bad intentions, but just the way that med school curriculum and PA school curriculum are designed. So the more I talked to people, the more I presented, and the more I realized like how hungry people were for this information, the more I realized that there was like an opportunity here to kind of improve education and empowerment around interpersonal violence, because I don't think it has to be something that we fear talking to people about. And we also know that it's a crime of secrecy. So the more we can bring it out into the light, the better we become kind of as a society. And so that's kind of where I started with IPV Educators. I do a lot of consulting work, a lot of lecturing for individual programs and helping them build a comprehensive curriculum. And then a lot of work with like hospital systems to help them kind of develop CME or CE options for interpersonal violence.
Wow, that's super inspiring. Incredible. Gosh, we're almost out of time, but one of our last questions, anything you know now that you wish you knew coming out of schooling?
Oh, what a good question. I think that there's a lot of things that kind of happen organically as you kind of head out into the big bad world of medicine out of school. But I think the number one thing is that I would say that I've learned is that money is not the only thing that you should be looking for in a job, and that it really is worth like taking a pay cut to work with people who are supportive and help you grow didactically and professionally. And so, not to say that I had bad experiences there, but rather just that I think that is something that I've really come to value in my career.
Yeah. If someone wants to reach out to you and find out more about your IPV Educators, how would they do that?
Yeah, thank you for that. I love hearing from people. Like, even if you just have like a random question, or you want to get more involved, or you want to help develop like some lectures or something, I would love to hear from you, no matter what it is. So I have a website. It is it'll be in the notes, I believe, for the podcast, but it's ipveducators.com. So www.ipveducators.com, all one word. Or I'm also on Twitter at IPV Educators, or you can reach me at, drumroll please, ipveducators@gmail.com. So any of those will work, and I will include all of those in the notes for the podcast as well.
Well, Katie, what a journey you've been on, and we've been so honored to be able to talk to you today and learn more about what you do. And I hope you inspire others by seeing, not only what you're doing in forensic medicine and emergency medicine, but out there with your LLC and, doing all you can to make a difference. So I really, really appreciate your time, and I'm looking forward to chatting with you again in the future.
No, absolutely. I'm happy to share. I'm very passionate about it. So I just love sharing, and, I'd love to inspire more people to consider this.
Well, thanks again. Have a wonderful day, and we'll be in touch.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. And I hope you guys have a great day.
Thank you to all our listeners. If you'd like to be notified when new episodes air, make sure to hit that subscribe button. And thank you to Pacific Companies. Without you guys, this podcast would not be possible. If you'd like to be a guest or for more information, go to www.pacificcompanies.com.